Alex Lifeson is widely celebrated as one of rock's most versatile and inventive guitarists. As a founding member of Rush, his soaring riffs and complex rhythms helped shape progressive rock for nearly 5 decades. Fans have long admired not just his technical brilliance, but also his reputation as the most easygoing and good-natured member of the band, a man who rarely spoke harshly about anyone. That's why it came as such a shock when, at 72, Lifeson finally opened up about the guitarists he admitted he truly hated. For decades, the music industry had speculated about rivalries between big names, but Lifeson himself remained mostly diplomatic, preferring to let his music do the talking. Yet in a rare and candid conversation, he pulled no punches, naming 6 guitarists whose work, behavior, or reputations rubbed him the wrong way. But what did hate really mean for Alex Lifeson? Was it outright dislike, or was it frustration with players whose styles clashed with his own musical vision? As we dig deeper, it becomes clear that his confessions were about more than just rivalries. They revealed the competitive, often cutthroat world of rock guitar where egos, styles, and philosophies collided. From clashes over technique to tensions backstage, Lifeson's list of 6 guitarists paints a fascinating picture of the challenges even a legend faces when working in an industry full of oversized personalities. Fans who thought they knew everything about Rush's quiet genius were stunned by his honesty and by the names that appeared on his list. This is the untold story of Alex Lifeson's biggest grudges in the world of guitar. To understand why Alex Lifeson's comments about other guitarists caused such a stir, it's important to look at the towering legacy he built over decades. Born Aleksandar Živojinović in 1953 to Serbian immigrant parents in Toronto, Canada, he discovered the guitar at a young age and was soon captivated by the sounds of pioneers like Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, and Jimmy Page. By the late 1960s, he had already formed the band that would define his life's work, Rush. With Geddy Lee on bass and vocals and Neil Peart eventually joining on drums, Rush became one of the most innovative and ambitious bands in rock history. Lifeson's guitar work was central to their sound. Unlike many guitarists of the era who chased raw speed or showmanship, Lifeson blended technical precision with deep emotion. His ability to weave intricate riffs, soaring solos, and atmospheric textures gave Rush its unique identity. Albums like 2112, 1976, Moving Pictures, 1981, and Permanent Waves, 1980, showcased Lifeson's versatility. On tracks like La Via Strangiato and Limelight, his guitar became more than just an instrument. It was a storyteller. He could be aggressive, lyrical, or experimental, often within the same song. Fans and critics alike recognized that Lifeson wasn't interested in copying trends. He was pushing boundaries, but his role went beyond just playing guitar. Lifeson was the anchor in a band that thrived on experimentation. While Geddy Lee and Neil Peart pushed Rush's music into complex lyrical and instrumental territory, Lifeson often acted as the glue, grounding the band's sound with his riffs and chord progressions. His contributions kept the music balanced, progressive yet accessible, technical yet emotional. By the 1980s, Lifeson had cemented his reputation as one of the greatest guitarists in rock. Guitar magazines routinely placed him on top 100 lists, and countless younger musicians cited him as an influence. His ability to shift from heavy rock to new wave-inspired textures during the band's synth-heavy era showed his adaptability and open-mindedness. Few guitarists of his generation managed to evolve so seamlessly with changing musical landscapes. Yet for all his achievements, Lifeson remained humble. Unlike many of his peers, he didn't chase the spotlight. He often joked about being overshadowed by Geddy's vocals and Neil's legendary drumming. Fans loved him for this down-to-earth quality. He was the approachable genius, the virtuoso who didn't need to remind you of his brilliance. This humility made his later revelations about hating certain guitarists even more shocking. Lifeson wasn't the type to trash talk. In fact, he was famously diplomatic in interviews, rarely speaking negatively about anyone in the industry. For him to openly criticize or even admit disdain for other players suggested that these rivalries and frustrations had been simmering beneath the surface for years. It's Also worth noting that Lifeson came up during a golden era of guitar, a time when the instrument was central to rock music. Competition among guitarists was fierce. From Eddie Van Halen to Randy Rhoads, the late 70s and early 80s were dominated by players trying to outdo each other with speed, technique, and innovation. While Lifeson respected many of his peers, he also found himself at odds with guitarists whose approaches clashed with his own philosophy. That's why his perspective matters. When Alex Lifeson talks about other guitarists, whether with admiration or disdain, it carries weight. This isn't just idle gossip. It's insight from a musician who stood shoulder to shoulder with some of the greatest players of all time. His words reveal not only personal rivalries, but also the broader story of how rock music evolved, shaped by both collaboration and competition. As much as Alex Lifeson is admired for his skill, creativity, and humility, his career wasn't free of tension. The world of rock guitar in the 1970s and 1980s was a fiercely competitive arena. Every year, new players emerged with faster solos, flashier techniques, or more extravagant stage performances. For Lifeson, who valued substance and storytelling in music, this often led to frustration, and sometimes even resentment on Dell. Of the key sources of tension was the guitar hero culture that exploded in the late 70s. Guitarists, like Eddie Van Halen, redefined what the instrument could do, dazzling audiences with speed, tapping, and pyrotechnics. While Lifeson respected Eddie's talent, he also disliked how many other players copied his style without bringing originality to the table. In interviews, Lifeson hinted that the obsession with speed and technicality was damaging to rock music, reducing the guitar from a voice of emotion into a circus act. These feelings intensified when Rush shared festival stages with bands who leaned heavily into this flash-over-substance style. Lifeson would sometimes joke about feeling out of place next to players who seemed more interested in showing off than making music. Beneath the humor, however, was a deeper frustration. He didn't hate the guitar as an instrument. He hated seeing it reduced to cheap tricks. Another clash came from how Rush was perceived by critics compared to their peers. Bands like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and Yes were often celebrated for their artistry, while Rush sometimes struggled to gain mainstream critical respect, particularly in the U.S. Lifeson felt that some guitarists received praise more because of their image than their actual contributions. He disliked the idea that charisma or lifestyle mattered more than the music itself. This sense of unfair recognition created tension between him and certain high-profile players. Within Rush's orbit, there were also industry pressures. Record labels frequently pushed the band to simplify their sound, especially during the late 1970s when punk and new wave were on the rise. Many guitarists leaned into more accessible riffs and radio-friendly hooks to stay relevant, but Lifeson resisted. He refused to compromise his complex chord progressions and unusual time signatures just to fit trends. His clashes with label executives and his disdain for musicians who sold out added to the list of frustrations that shaped his perspective. Interestingly, Lifeson's rivalries weren't always about technical style or industry politics. Sometimes they came from personal interactions. Lifeson has recalled meeting guitarists who were arrogant or dismissive, especially toward Rush's progressive leanings. The band's long songs and intellectual lyrics weren't always respected in the hard rock community. Some guitarists mocked their nerdy approach, and Lifeson, though polite in public, took those slights personally. All of this built a quiet storm. Fans were often surprised when Lifeson later admitted to hating certain guitarists because outwardly he was so diplomatic. But behind the scenes, these tensions were very real. They weren't about jealousy. Lifeson had no shortage of success. Instead, they reflected his disappointment in how the instrument he loved was sometimes cheapened, misrepresented, or overshadowed by ego. In a sense, these rivalries shaped him as much as his influences did. Lifeson worked harder to carve his own identity, ensuring that no one could mistake his playing for someone else's. He refused to be part of a clone culture, and in doing so, he built a style that has remained instantly recognizable decades later. His disdain, therefore, wasn't just personal. It was a defense of the guitar as a true instrument of artistry. By the time he openly revealed his feelings about specific guitarists, the rock world had already shifted. But his words were a reminder that behind every legendary career, there are rivalries and frustrations that shape the music we hear. For Alex Lifeson, the guitar was too important to let ego, shortcuts, or gimmicks define it. When Alex Lifeson finally revealed the names of the 6 guitarists he admitted to disliking, the rock world was stunned. Fans had long assumed Lifeson was above rivalries, but his list showed that even the most good-natured musicians carry their share of grudges. What stood out was not just who he named, but why. Each story reflected his deep respect for the instrument and his frustration with how some players treated it. One of the first names he mentioned was Yngwie Malmsteen. Known for his lightning-fast neoclassical shredding, Malmsteen dazzled audiences in the 1980s. But Lifeson felt that his playing often prioritized speed over soul. To him, guitar should be about emotion, storytelling, and texture, not just technical fireworks. Lifeson once commented that while Malmsteen's technique was impressive, it was also exhausting, like being shouted at without a pause. He didn't hate the man personally, but he disliked how Malmsteen's influence encouraged a generation of players to chase speed instead of creativity. Another guitarist who made his list was Ted Nugent. While Nugent had his share of hit songs and a strong stage presence, his larger-than-life personality often overshadowed his music. Lifeson, who valued humility and camaraderie, found Nugent's brashness hard to stomach. The clash was more personal than musical. Rush had shared stages with Nugent in the 1970s, and Lifeson recalled moments where Nugent's ego rubbed him the wrong way. For a man like Lifeson, who saw music as a collaborative art, Nugent's approach felt like self-promotion above all else. Lifeson also mentioned Kirk Hammett of Metallica, though his reasons were more nuanced. He respected Hammett's success and acknowledged Metallica's influence, but he struggled with the simplicity of Hammett's solos compared to the technical complexity Rush strived for. Lifeson admitted that he hated the way Hammett became a household name for work he felt was relatively basic compared to what countless other guitarists were doing behind the scenes. It wasn't jealousy, it was frustration at how commercial recognition sometimes failed to align with true musical innovation. Another surprising inclusion was Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. Fans were shocked, since Page is often considered one of the greatest guitarists of all time. But Lifeson's criticisms weren't about Page's creativity, they were about consistency. In interviews, Lifeson expressed disappointment that Page's live performances often fell short of his studio brilliance. For someone like Lifeson, who prided himself on precision and consistency night after night, this was a source of irritation. It wasn't that he denied Page's genius. Rather, he disliked what he saw as carelessness in live execution. Eddie Van Halen also made the list, though again, the reasoning was complex. Lifeson admired Eddie's groundbreaking style, but hated how quickly the industry latched onto him as the future of guitar, overshadowing other innovative players. He felt Eddie's legacy became more about myth and marketing than about balance in artistry. Lifeson made it clear that he respected Eddie's talent but despised the cult of personality that rose around him. Finally, there was Steve Vai. Lifeson acknowledged Vai's technical brilliance, but struggled with what he perceived as excess. To him, Vai embodied the very thing he disliked about the 1980s guitar scene, music that sometimes seemed more like an athletic competition than an expressive craft. While Vai's performances dazzled millions, Lifeson admitted he found them empty, more spectacle than substance. Taken together, these 6 names revealed much more about Lifeson than about the players themselves. His criticisms were never rooted in jealousy. They came from a place of passion for the instrument. He hated gimmicks, ego, and shortcuts. He hated when skill wasn't matched by soul. And most of all, he hated when the guitar lost its purpose as a voice for something greater than speed or fame. In truth, his list said less about rivalry and more about his philosophy. The guitar, to Alex Lifeson, was sacred, and anyone who treated it otherwise was bound to draw his ire. When Alex Lifeson's comments about the 6 guitarists he hated became public, the reaction from fans and the music press was immediate. Many were shocked, not because they disagreed with him, but because Lifeson had always been known as the quiet diplomat of Rush. Geddy Lee and Neil Peart often dominated the spotlight, while Lifeson stayed in the background, contributing humor and brilliance without much controversy. For him to openly criticize other guitarists was unusual, and it forced the rock world to take a closer look at his perspective. The responses from fans were mixed. Some were surprised by the inclusion of legends like Jimmy Page or Eddie Van Halen, pointing out that these guitarists were among Lifeson's peers and heroes to millions. But others defended Lifeson, saying his honesty was refreshing. After all, who better to critique the state of guitar playing than someone who had spent decades pushing its boundaries? Even fans of the guitarists Lifeson criticized admitted he had a point. Technical skill or fame doesn't always equal artistry. The musicians themselves, for the most part, didn't respond directly. Eddie Van Halen had already passed by the time Lifeson's comments gained traction, and Jimmy Page stayed silent. Yngwie Malmsteen, known for his fiery personality, brushed off the criticism, saying he never cared what other players thought of him. Ted Nugent, true to form, cracked a few jokes at Rush's expense, but avoided a direct feud. Kirk Hammett and Steve Vai both took the high road, acknowledging Lifeson's influence on their own work and sidestepping controversy. What mattered more than the reactions was what these revelations told us about Lifeson himself. His words revealed a man who never lost sight of what music meant to him. For Lifeson, guitar playing wasn't about outshining others or chasing the spotlight. It was about contributing to a larger story. His frustrations with certain players reflected his lifelong mission to keep the guitar grounded in creativity, rather than gimmick or ego. In a way, his honesty only deepened his legacy. Lifeson had always been respected for his technical skill, but this glimpse into his candid opinions showed fans another side, a passionate guardian of the art form. While some might see his list as harsh, many others saw it as proof that Lifeson's love for the guitar was so deep that he couldn't stand to see it misused. The comments also sparked broader conversations about what makes a guitarist truly great. Is it technical mastery? Is it stage presence? Is it emotional connection? For Lifeson, the answer was clear. Greatness came from originality, sincerity, and the ability to move listeners. His criticisms weren't meant to tear others down. They were an expression of his values, forged over decades of pushing the limits of progressive rock. As Lifeson entered his 70s, his willingness to finally open up about these grudges suggested a sense of closure. After a lifetime of holding back, he allowed himself to be blunt. Fans might have disagreed with some of his picks, but they respected his candor. For an artist who had spent so much of his career letting the music speak for him, it was striking to finally hear his unfiltered words. Today, Alex Lifeson remains a figure of quiet integrity in the rock world. His place in history is secure, not just as Rush's guitarist, but as one of the most innovative players of his generation. The 6 names he revealed may have raised eyebrows, but they also reminded us that even legends have their frustrations, their disappointments, and their rivalries. In the end, the story wasn't about hate, it was about love. Love for the guitar, love for the craft, and love for music that dares to go deeper. And that, perhaps more than anything, is why Alex Lifeson's legacy continues to resonate with fans around the world.